If you're learning English, you might be learning in your home country, going to classes a few hours a week. This is usually called EFL, English as a Foreign Language. Or you might be living in a country where English is the first language and you need the language to survive, to get a job, to study perhaps. This is usually called ESOL, English to Speakers of Other Languages. These are sometimes seen as quite separate, and so in this video I'd like to explore the differences and similarities between the two groups. I'm Joga Conga, and this is another video for elttraining.com. The first thing I should tell you is that I've taught EFL in 3 different countries, and I've taught ESOL in the UK for over 13 years. So I've got a fair idea of both groups, and in my opinion the differences between them aren't that great. In the UK, the difference was exacerbated in the past, I think, because EFL teachers tended to come from a language teaching background and ESOL teachers tended to come from a background where they'd been teaching literacy to adult learners whose first language was English. The split is less pronounced these days, and as far back as 2007 the British Council put out this report to say that actually the distinction wasn't that useful. In both cases, of course, what you're trying to do is teach people the language. There are a few things that are worth thinking about though. If you're teaching English in a private language school overseas, your EFL learners, as a rule, will be reasonably well educated and from relatively affluent backgrounds. If they or their parents have got enough money to pay your school to teach them English, they're probably not worried about where the next meal's coming from. There are, of course, contexts in which this isn't the case, for example in state schools, but in private language schools this is the norm. This means that they've probably learned English in school for quite a long time, and they probably know what the present perfect is, for example, so you can use that kind of meta-language in class. They're also almost certainly literate in their first language and probably in the Roman alphabet too. You'll probably be teaching them in monolingual classes, so they'll all have the first same language. So if you know that language, you can use translation where appropriate. And they'll all probably have good access to the internet, so you can use that to provide links to useful things for outside of class. So that's EFL. Now, what about ESOL? ESOL classes will usually be funded at least partially by the state, and the learners in them will tend to be a bit more of a mixed bag. Let's have a look at some possible examples. Here's Pierre. He's from the DRC and he's come to the UK as an asylum seeker. He's completely bilingual in Lingala and French. He had his whole education in French actually, and he also speaks Swahili pretty well. And he's a doctor. He's educated, literate, he has great study skills, and he's got a history of being successful with language learning. He knows lots of English words because they're cognates with French, and he's already made some English friends through the work that he currently does as a care worker. He's also very motivated to learn because he wants to be able to practice medicine in the UK. He's going to learn English pretty quickly. Let me introduce someone else. This is Susanna. She's from Poland and she's in the UK for work. She's a graduate in computer science and she's working in IT. She lives with her boyfriend who's also Polish, so she speaks her own language at home. She learnt English in school for 6 years, but she doesn't feel very confident in speaking it. But her colleagues are friendly and she's getting to know them. She'll probably learn reasonably quickly. Now let's take a different case. This is Amina. She's from Pakistan and she's come to the UK to get married. She's bright and motivated, but she comes from a remote rural area and she's never been to school. So she's illiterate, both in Urdu, which is her first and only language, and in the Roman alphabet. She's also quite shy. And although she's in an English-speaking country, she lives with her family in an area where there are lots of other Urdu speakers, so she doesn't get much opportunity to use English outside of class. It's going to be much more difficult for her to learn English. The point I'm making here is that ESOL isn't a single entity. Whatever your learners, you're going to have to be careful about their needs, but this is probably particularly true in ESOL classes. I think there are a few things that it's worth being aware of. Some ESOL learners will have experienced some quite horrific circumstances, and so topics like my family might be quite distressing and will need to be handled with some sensitivity. In conjunction with this, your role as a teacher might have more of a pastoral flavour, because learners might have difficulty in their new countries with jobs or landlords and things like that. The second thing is that some ESOL learners will have trouble with basic literacy. That adds an extra layer of challenge to learning English. Connected with this, some ESOL learners won't have had a lot of education because perhaps their education has been disrupted, and so they'll need more support with study skills. In some cases, access to the internet might be limited. In my experience, all ESOL learners have a smartphone. It's their lifeline often to connection with family at home, but they might not have other devices. So if you're teaching online, they might well be accessing on a small screen, and you need to consider this when you're thinking about your materials. Finally, you might want to take a bit more of a functional approach to ESOL classes, especially at lower levels. They're going to need language which will help them in their new environment, going to the shops, going to the doctors, dealing with schools. My personal feeling is, though, that this can be overdone, and it shouldn't preclude a general emphasis on teaching language in just the same way that you would teach language to any learner. So there you go. This is a big area and I've only scratched the surface, but I hope that I've given you a bit of a flavour of the difference between these two groups of learners. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.